hand out some revisions that I was working on. Actually, some of this you'll see. I tell you what, if you could help me, Charlie, if you can get this side over here, and I'll get the side over here. This could go on pages 43 and 44 of your little workbook. And what I've done is I've put the notes that I've revised in red font. And some of it we went over this Sunday morning. And you can, if you look on page, I think it's 43, where K is, Jesus defends his disciples for feasting rather than fasting. If you look for that, I think it's not at the top of the page. I think it's like maybe 2/3 of the way down. But anyway, you'll see that those notes were not there. And I wanted to add them. Again, some of this we discussed a little bit on Sunday morning, but not all of it. And I wanted to give that to you. And if it's helpful, wonderful. And if it's not, you can line your bird cage with it. Okay, what was that, Charles? Okay, yeah. David Hartzell told me one time that some lady told him, David, I just really love your bulletin. And he was feeling so proud of himself, you know. He said, yes, it's an 8.5 by 14. It fits perfectly in the bottom of my bird cage. And that's pretty bad, isn't it, Janet? All right, first of all, let's go back to our readings just for a moment. In our public readings, our private readings that we review publicly, the 12th, which was Monday, is Ezekiel 40 through 42. That's number 255, kind of the bottom right-hand corner of your reading chart. And that would go down through really the end of Ezekiel for tonight. And I wanted to just say just a couple things about all of this. I didn't really go through much of an outline of Ezekiel. We did, some time back when we were studying it. But the first 24 chapters of Ezekiel deals with God's judgment on Judah as well as the city of Jerusalem. And then he didn't leave anybody else or everybody else alone. There are the judgments concerning the surrounding nations in chapters 25 through 32. And then in 33 through 48, he really deals with the restoration. And in that, the responsibilities of the watchmen, the attitudes toward them in 33, the message to shepherds in 34, and then the contrast between the future of Edom as well as Israel in 35 and 36. In 37, we didn't say anything about this Sunday, but that's about where we be tonight. In 37, you have the vision of the what? The dry bones, the valley of the dry bones. And basically, you Jews look like you're dead, you're in captivity, but what's going to happen? God's going to resurrect you. But there's a secondary, or I guess you could say an ultimate fulfillment of this resurrection. And you'll notice down in verse 15, this is 37:15. I want to make a point of this. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, And thou, son of man, take thee one stick, and write upon it for Judah, and the children of Israel, his companions, and take another stick, and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and the house of Israel, and put them both together. And then if you drop down to verse 24, his servant David shall be king over them. The two sticks, the Mormons tell us the two sticks one represents the Bible, the other the Book of Mormon. Well, Ezekiel tells us what they mean. Each stick represents what? Yeah, exactly. One Judah, the other the northern kingdom of Israel, or Ephraim. Ephraim stands for Israel. And somehow they would both come together under the Messiah, under the second David, there in verse 24. When would that happen? During the AD 30, yes, during the time of the Messiah, the church. And here's one of those cases, guys, that I was thinking about. It's a great point to make. and that is that when people go off and try to make the Bible say something it really doesn't say, contextually, you can usually come right back and see what the truth is, just as you can here. The sticks don't represent the Bible and the Book of Mormon. They represent the people who were divided, who would come together eventually under Christ. Anyway, that's 37, the Valley of the Dry Bones, and the union of Israel and Judah. In 38 and 39, verse 38, verse 2, Son of man, set your face toward what? Gog, in the land of Magog. I take it to be that both chapters deal primarily with the triumph that God would have over the various nations of the earth. And then in 40 through 48, which is really where we are tonight, we finish up 40 through 46 through 48. In 40 through 48, the vision of the new temple is seen here. And we talked at length about that when we were going through it. But the temple and the worship, the description is given in 40, 41, 42, and 43. And was it smaller, the same size, or larger, that is, given the dimensions it shows, than the Solomonic temple? What's that? It's a whole lot larger, And the area was much larger. In fact, it wouldn't even fit in Palestine. So it has to be a figurative expression of the Messiah's reign. In 44, 45, and 46, he really talks about what would be, we would say, what in the Messiah's kingdom? When people would do what? Anybody? You got priests mentioned, what they would do. What's another name for all that? I don't mean to throw you a curve. Worship. There you go, Richard. It's their worship. And he gives, again, they were familiar with what the priests would do. That's primarily what he describes. And then in 47 and 48, he describes the land where the tribes would be. But again, it has to be a figurative expression to denote the all-encompassing nature of the Messiah's kingdom. All right, comment or question? All right, Ezekiel is it's a challenging book, really, but it's good for us to go back. Okay, so when we get to the life of Jesus, let's go back and without reviewing much, just remember that we've got the years of preparation. And then second, the years of preparation really kind of end when Jesus is baptized, which begins the beginning ministry. And we have his baptism, his temptation, then the accounts in John 1, 2, and 3. And then by this time the Pharisees know Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John. And John has been imprisoned. He's been taken from Enon near Salem and taken over to Machaerus on the opposite side of the Jordan, really the Dead Sea area. And so Jesus goes up, and so in chapter 4, going up, he's going down from Jerusalem up on a mount. He comes to Sychar, the well at Sychar, and we have the conversation with the woman at the well. All right, then he comes, then people in Samaria are converted. Then he goes to Cana, where he heals the nobleman's son who was over in Capernaum. Goes down to Nazareth, where he goes in the synagogue, reads, and then they want to throw him off the cliff. He passes from their midst, then goes to Capernaum. And so then in Capernaum, we have really the headquarters for his movement in this area. He calls the 4 disciples to follow him. And then he teaches in the synagogue and heals the demoniac. So it's a Sabbath day healing. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then after that, they leave and they go over to Peter's house where his mother-in-law is sick of a fever. He heals her. She immediately begins to do what for them? Serve their needs. And then he tours Galilee preaching and healing, all in this area. And then he comes back and he's there in Capernaum, possibly Peter's house, maybe somebody else's, and the crowds are just all around. And he's preaching the word of God, and then this paralytic comes, and evidently he wants to see Jesus so badly. And how do they get to him? Through the roof, moving the tiles of the roof. All right, Jesus commends their faith and forgives his sins. All right? And then we have the beginning of the hostility. The Pharisees reason, who can forgive sins but God? And so he makes himself equal to God. And Jesus, of course, knew what they were reasoning and answered that. Which is easier to say, thy sins be forgiven, or take up your bed and walk. And so everybody could know that the Son of Man had authority on earth to forgive sins. He told the fellow, take up your bed, and he did. And they're amazed. All right, and then after that, we have the healing of the paralytic. We call Matthew, Jesus calls Matthew, or Levi, whose occupation was tax collector. And he said, follow me, and the account says he left all, like Peter, Andrew, James, and John did. And then immediately thereafter, according to Mark's account, he makes a feast for Jesus, and we talked about this Sunday morning. And in the feast, there are at least 6 groupings there of people. We talked about I got ahead of ourselves here. There's 6 groupings of people. Did I mention that? Did I mention that Sunday morning? Did I? Okay, yeah. The fishermen, Nathaniel and Philip. We don't know what the Roman government workers. And Jesus did not draw the line. He wanted to do them good, and so he defends them. And then what we had on the chart Sunday morning, I revised that, and it's in your notes here. He then gives really 3 illustrations of what the feasting that they were doing in Levi's house was fine. And he said the first really applied to himself. When friends of the bridegroom are present in a wedding feast, they're not doing what? They're not fasting. They're enjoying it. They're feasting. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away, and then there will be times of sadness and fasting. And we're thinking John 14. You remember where Jesus it's the Thursday night that he would be betrayed. And he tells the apostles, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And then he goes on to try to comfort them. So there would be a time of sadness. A second illustration, he says, no man puts a new piece of cloth on an old garment. It hasn't been washed or dressed properly. It's new, and so a larger rent will be made if that happens. Third illustration, no man puts new wine in old wineskins. And I kind of tried to dress up really what I was doing on the chart the other day. If you look on that page I gave you, the second paragraph under C, you see C and then the note, and the next paragraph. Therefore, in the first place, it could be Jesus is illustrating his conduct among publicans and sinners as new to the Pharisees, and that they were unaccustomed to this different attitude toward sinners. Jesus' attitude toward doing good to everyone rips apart Pharisaical self-righteousness. Second, in his last illustration, no one having drunk old wine immediately desires new, for he says the old is better, may refer to the Pharisees' desire to maintain their own system of self-righteousness rather than listen to Jesus, which would be recent in time. He's the new kid on the block, so to speak. Third, it was impossible for Jesus in his mission to seek and save those who were lost to conform to the religious leaders of his day. The old cloth of Judaism would rip. The old wineskin of Pharisaical self-righteousness would burst due to their unwillingness to accept Jesus' new teaching and conduct. Whatever may be Jesus' intended spiritual applications, the obvious meaning is that demanding fasting at this time was not appropriate for the occasion. We know that, and how far we would go with those other applications I'm not certain. But anyway, there for your consideration. The second note that we mentioned Sunday morning, scholars say that some Jews fasted on the second and fifth days of each week, the Mondays and Thursdays, like the Pharisee that went to the temple to pray. I fast twice a week, he said. And we've already studied where Jesus fasted immediately after his baptism, and now the Pharisees and John's disciples wonder why Jesus and his disciples are not fasting. And following are some facts about fasting. I wanted us to kind of spend just a moment on that because there's been quite a bit of discussion among some brethren about, we're not doing enough, we need to be fasting. And so I put together what is on the chart here is basically what you have on the paper. If you looked at it just from both testaments, both the views from both testaments, the only time the Mosaic law demanded fasting was on the Day of Atonement. Fasting was commanded one day per year. They were told to afflict your souls or deny yourselves, the NIV says, and that was the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16:29 through 31. As time passed, the Jews began multiplying to themselves fast days. They kept, after the Babylonian captivity, at least 4 fasts, Zechariah says. And they were based on, some defeat at the hands of an enemy or some kind of humiliating historical event. By the time of Jesus, some Pharisees kept 2 a week. We alluded to that just a moment ago. And it seemed like it was an activity associated with deep grief, mourning over sins, some calamity or humiliation the people had undergone. 2 Samuel 12, you know the story there. What David did when Nathan confronted him about Bathsheba and the baby was going to die. David did that. 1 Kings 19 with Elijah. So it just seems like when the chips are down and people know they are in sin, and they know, and really that was the Day of Atonement was the day of atoning when they remembered their what? Their sins, yeah. Well, when we come to the New Testament, godly people fasted in the New Testament. Certainly, you remember studying Anna in Luke 2. She fasted with supplications day and night. Jesus fasted for how many days? Matthew 4. 40. Paul in Acts 9 fasted for how many days in Damascus? 3. How long they fasted varied. And our language reflects this in the word breakfast, breaking our fast. And it might be 8, 10, 12, could be 16 hours, but that's the background of the word breakfast. During Jesus' ministry, Pharisees fasted to be seen of men. You remember in Matthew 6, he said, when you fast, indicating people would, don't go around with a long face and so on as the Pharisees do, who want to be seen of men. But when you fast, wash your face and anoint your head that you be not seen of men. In other words, go about your business and don't make a spectacle out of yourself. And the other 2 things in Matthew 6, you remember the first thing is giving alms. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand does. Second thing is prayer. Don't pray, don't make a public spectacle of yourself on the street corners, right where everybody can see it. But when you pray, you go into the inner chamber, into your closet. And then the third thing he mentions is fasting. And so those were evidently 3 things that were common among the religious leaders that Jesus said, don't make a spectacle of yourself in all this. Among genuine disciples, it seems like to me fasting was the effect or an effect caused by deep spiritual concerns. Jesus had just been baptized and he was driven in the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And he knows it's like here is his whole ministry before his eyes. And he's contemplating all that. And so there's deep spiritual concerns. And then, in Luke 5 that we just were studying, that's what Jesus is saying there. There's a time to fast. And it's implied when The bridegroom is gone. There's a time of sadness there. In Acts 9, verse 9, it was when Saul was in Damascus praying and fasting for 3 days and 3 nights. That was before somebody got there to tell him what to do to be saved. Who was it? Ananias, that's right. So he's been told, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It's hard for you to kick against the goads. So he goes into the city, and he doesn't know what to do, but he knows that he's been responsible for persecuting people who are following the Christ of God. And so he's overwrought with guilt about all of that. And so he's fasting. Now, in 13:2 and 3, we have the occasion where, that's Acts 13:2 and 3, where the church in Antioch of Syria will be sending out Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark. And they're going to be sending them out primarily among what kind of people? What groups ethnically? Gentiles. And they don't know if they'll see them again. They don't know what's going to come. They'll be going certainly among the Jews, but they'll be speaking among Gentiles as well. They don't know if they'll see them again. So turn with me to that passage in Acts 13. Whoever finds it first, read it. Acts 13:2 and 3. Okay. All right. Good. So, 2 and 3.
As they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Spirit said, "Then separate to me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I called them." Then having fasted and prayed and laid hands on them, they sent them away.
Yeah, I'm not so certain that they're having a big high old time and feasting and everything. They're concerned. They know this is serious business. They don't know if they'll see those fellows again. And so they fast and pray. Chapter 14, the next time that it's mentioned, Paul has been all the way to Galatia, where he goes to Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, and then he begins to retrace the first journey. And you'll notice there in verse 23, who has that? Go ahead, anybody who has it, read it. Yeah, so they're praying and they're fasting, prayer and fasting. And the occasion here is the appointment of elders. So it's a big deal. It's a big, big deal. And so I think if you put all that together, that they didn't announce a fast, but they prayed, they were discussing matters that are of great spiritual import, and also they didn't know what was going to come in the future. And so it seems like to me, if somebody says, what do you think fasting was for? I think it was the effect that people had that was caused by these deep, driven concerns over spirituality, sins, and so on. The spiritual concerns were the cause. Fasting was the effect. And I put in the note here, and it's in your note, this seems to be the primary reason fasting occurred with Jesus and Christians in the New Testament, and should be today whenever practiced. Rather than announce a fast and manufacture a cause, as some religious groups do, godly people were so concerned about spiritual matters that they would forego eating and spend more time in prayer and discussion of God's Word. I think you see a hint of it in John 4. Let's take just a moment, because we're going to see fasting as a big, big part of the life of Jesus insofar as what they're one of the hostilities that develop. In John 4, all right, we've got Jesus going through Samaria, comes to Sychar, and you'll notice in verse 5, he came to a city of Samaria, and Jacob's well was there. He was wearied. He sat down, and then in verse 7, a woman of Samaria comes because his disciples, verse 8, what had happened? They had gone into the city to buy food. All right, so now we have the conversation with the woman at the well. Well, he identifies himself to her as the Messiah, verse 24, 5, 6, and then in 27, they return. The disciples come back. They marvel that he was speaking with a woman. She leaves her water pot, goes into the city, and tells them, come see a man who told me all I ever did. All right, so now in verse 31, in the meanwhile, the disciples prayed him, requested him, Rabbi, eat. You need to eat. Well, you were tired when we got here. You were thirsty because you asked the woman to give me a drink. And it took a while for them to go into the city and a while for them to come back. So look at Jesus' answer. He said, I have meat to eat that you know not. And the disciples therefore said, has any man brought him something to eat? And Jesus said, my meat is to do the will of him that sent me to accomplish his work. And then in 35 through 38, he says, you don't need to look around and say, well, one of these days we'll get to it. The harvest is white now. There are people who can be saved now. People who need to come to me in faith now. So the point I want to make in relation to fasting on this is, and I have this in the sentence. Notice John 4, where Jesus' disciples left him to go into the city to buy food. He next discussed spiritual matters with the woman. Evidently, considerable time had passed when the disciples returned, and they thought he would be hungry. Note Jesus' response and the greater concern over souls than on food. And we just went over that. Rather than feast and play as many do now, early disciples fasted and prayed. So the answer in getting back to this is not external surroundings or programs or announcements of the church at Pleasant Grove is going to fast for 2 days beginning tomorrow, but it's deeper individual commitment to God and a concern for spiritual matters. Then to wrap all this up, there's no place in the New Testament where fasting was commanded for the church. Now, we find where the church in Antioch, they fasted and prayed, yes. And I believe there could be occasions when we would do that. But it's not like, okay, on the first day of the week you're to eat the Lord's Supper and fast. That's just not there. Or foot washing, Fasting was never commanded, nor was the Old Testament practice commanded to continue for individuals. When someone fasts, Jesus states what is to be done and how. It is to be privately. Anoint your head, wash your face, that you'll not be seen of men to fast. And then merely fasting is not something we do in order to become more spiritual. In other words, if I fast, then I will become more spiritual. No. You're being devoted to God, and as a result of that and concern over spiritual matters, you forego eating. And so it becomes the effect and not the cause. That's the best I can do with that, guys. But I've had a kind of an email discussion with a fella, and he took the view that we ought to be fasting. And I asked him, well, how many days? How long? And what is the church to do in order to call a fast? And how many days? There are too many questions you can't answer because there's just no Bible, there's no Bible authority that I see for it, except what we're saying here, that if a person is given over and he's concerned about these things, it'll come as a natural outgrowth. I think, I know I've said this in classes, maybe not in this class, but sometimes when you're really, you're not really sure how things are going to go, or there's some trauma in maybe you're not like I am, but if there's something that's just really upsetting, I'm not hungry. You couldn't force me to eat. I may have told some of you, when my granddaddy died, I was 15 years old, and I just loved him so much. And he died suddenly of a heart attack. And my dad came to get me at school, and I knew something was amiss. Dad didn't do that. He was working, and the first thing he said, son, I've got some really bad news. Papa died this morning. And I just fell apart. Well, I got to my grandmother, and people were already bringing food in. And I couldn't eat. I couldn't eat until after his funeral. I was 15 at the time. It was just so traumatic to me and so sudden. And on the other hand, before Lee and I married, the week we married on a Friday night, I stopped eating about Tuesday. I was, I'd been preaching for a while, and I knew this is a lifetime commitment. Am I doing and it wasn't a thing against her. It was just the matter, this is big, and that's me. I don't know if you're the same way. Sometimes if I've got some lesson to give, or I've been thinking, doing this, trying to work all these, it can take, and maybe it's because I'm slow, but putting these notes together and getting it just right, grammar-wise and everything, it takes hours for me. And I usually just get kind of an involuntary fast maybe, but I just think that's the idea of it. It's not like Brother Charlie says, I got a good idea for Pleasant Grove. I think we're going to be better off if we just call it a fast. I just don't think that's what the Lord intended. And the last passage I do want to remind you of that's on the chart is in Colossians 2. And this goes back to what some call asceticism. And that's simply a long word to describe the denial of certain things relative to the body that are not wrong, but it's the denial of certain things in order to try to increase one's spirituality. So he said in 2:20, if you died with Christ from the rudiments of the world, this is Colossians 2:20, why as though living in the world do you subject yourselves to ordinances? And I think it would be like such as, don't handle, don't taste, don't touch, all which things are to perish with the using after the precepts and doctrines of men, which things have indeed a show of wisdom and will worship and humility. And here's our phrase, severity to the body. What do your translation have for that? What's that? Neglect, yes. But, what does he say? What's the rest of it? But are not of any value against fleshly indulgence. It doesn't help you become more spiritual. It looks good. It sounds good. But what it sounds like is you're worshiping your own will worship. And you come up with this what seems like a good idea. We're going to get all spiritual if we don't eat for a couple of days. Or we're going to give up, chewing gum. Or like some groups do for Lent. If we do this, this is going to show how we grow spiritually. It looks like to me that's not how you do it. I've been doing all the talking. David, anything you want to add? Thanks, but if I missed the point, missed the boat, my friend I was having a discussion with went through all those Old Testament passages where so many people fasted, and there's no disagreement. People in the New Testament fasted, but it was always seemingly an effect that was caused by these deep-seated spiritual desires or problems that people were. Anybody else? Janet, you look like you want to say something. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see more about this in a minute, and we see actually on the case with where Jesus attends this the feast of Matthew. Let me back up here. He attended the feast of Matthew, and there were John's disciples as well as the Pharisees and the scribes who were fasting. And what were Jesus and Matthew and his buddies doing? They were feasting. And they criticized Jesus for that. Lee and I were talking this afternoon, and I want you to think kind of outside the box. Lee said that she thought it would be a good idea if you made a little a note to yourself about the occasions that are going to further the hostility against Jesus. Let's think so far what's happened. He healed the demoniac in Capernaum in Mark 1, but no problem. It was a Sabbath, no problem. And then in Mark 2, he heals the paralytic, and you got two problems. They say, who can forgive sins but God? So he puts himself in a second and related position. He puts himself on an equality with God. So he forgave sins, which indicated he was equal with God. So you got two things there that the Pharisees are kind of, they're beginning to show their disapproval. All right? Then what we just got through studying. when he is in the feast with Matthew, the Pharisees are not feasting but fasting. And they come, why are your disciples fasting and our disciples, we're not doing that? Why? So you got that problem. Then that's another. Then where we're going also in John 5, which will be our next area of study. In John 5, he is going to heal a lame man back in Jerusalem, but it's going to be on what day? The Sabbath. And he's going to tell the man, take up your bed, go home. And so that is going to rile the Pharisees. They're not going to ask the guy, well, who in the world could do this? Let us know who this wonderful man is. It was not that. What are you doing carrying your cot on the Sabbath day? You know, they were blinded by their traditions to the wonderful nature of the miracle. Well, I've done a lot of talking tonight, but I just wanted to kind of get all those ideas out. We answered, did we not? We answered all of our questions on the top of page 44, 43, and 44. We answered all that, didn't we? Okay. All right, good. All right, so let's, we've got about 5 to 10 minutes. Let's go to John, the 5th chapter, and I'm going to come back to here we go. Jesus attends a feast and he heals a lame man. Now, where has Jesus been? Where has he been? What area? I don't mean where in the Bible. What area geographically? In Galilee. He's been up around here, around Capernaum. Now, what we're going to do is jump down to Jerusalem, because he comes there and it's just considered a feast of the Jews. So let's go to what I'm going to do. Let me show you something that I put together on here that's really in your notes. But Jesus attends this feast, and in the first 9 verses, he heals this man, and then John records. It's almost like an afterthought, but it's not. It's like in anticipation of everything that's coming. In John 5, verse 9, the last phrase, last sentence, it was the what? Sabbath on that day. All right? Now, we're just going to overview it. So what happens is, these Jewish leaders, they ask about that. They said to the man who was cured, it's a Sabbath. Don't you know that in verse 10? It's not lawful for you to take up your bed. Rather than say, where is this fellow that did this? So we can see him. He must be something. He must be a prophet of God or something. No. Why are you doing that? But he said, he that made me whole, the same said, take up my bed and walk. Well, who is that? And so finally, Jesus finds this man in the temple. And he said, you need to sin no more, that a worse thing happened, which may indicate that whatever caused his lameness could have happened due to some sin in which he was involved. We don't know exactly. But in verse 15, the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him whole. For this cause, the Jews persecuted Jesus, because he did these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father works even until now, and I work. Well, what is he saying here? What's the significance of that? That's right. He's God's Son in a unique way. And for this cause, what did the Jews desire to do? Kill him. Now, we hadn't had that so far, but that's going to be, again, the furthering of the hostilities toward Jesus. And because he not only broke the Sabbath, or their traditions about it, but also called God his own Father, making himself equal with God. All right? We're just going to keep going. Jesus' speech then showed his relationship with the Father in the next paragraph, in 19 through 29. And then, at the end of the chapter, really it's about 18 verses, he calls, and you can follow the arguments pretty easily. He starts making arguments as to the fact that, hey, I am deity. God himself has testified to that. John has testified that I'm the Christ. Then the miracles the Father did have been through me. And the scriptures that you search the scriptures, for in them you think you have life. and they are they that testify of me. Those scriptures testified of me. And then Moses spoke of me. If you believe Moses, you'd believe me. You'd believe my words. And so he really shows that that they don't really appreciate Moses. All right, that's the overview of John 5.
So the Pharisees could see their ranks in a way.
Yes.
They see him doing things they can't explain.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do it. And they see the things return to them. And so their answer is kill him.
Exactly.
Don't find out why. Let's just kill him.
Exactly. That's great. I was telling Lee this afternoon, you know, we talk oftentimes about the fact that God can do several things in one shot. Here's a case where Jesus is showing his deity through the miracles that he's performing. And we've already made the point that, you know, his miracles show his power over every area of human experience. So but during doing the miracles he did, like on this occasion, on the Sabbath day, it's actually a violation of their traditions. And so he's challenging the religious hierarchy of his day by the very miracles and when they were accomplished. So he's doing several things at one shot through all of this. Let's read. Let's begin to read here. 5, 1 through 9. Richard, if you would. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. All right. I'm sorry, go ahead. All right, good. Now let's answer some of our questions. I observed the Passover on some of this. I didn't say anything about the angels stirring the water. Evidently, that was a thought by the Jews. Anyway, on let me back up in the note. We changed scenes from Galilee to Jerusalem. There's no certain way of knowing when this event occurred because no definite break in Matthew, Mark, or Luke to show such. However, since this story deals with conflicts over the Sabbath, we're grouping it where we are. The A.T. Robertson in his Harmony, the Waldrons, others do the same. Though the feast that Jesus here attends is unnamed, more evidence indicates it was another Passover, others being mentioned in John 2, and then the next chapter, John 6, and the last one, John 11, is the Passover on which Jesus will be killed. Keep in mind that these were the only markers that provide a timeline for Jesus' life. All right, we've got the record of the miracle, showing he's master over disease, Lord of the Sabbath. In Jerusalem, there was by the what gate? The sheep gate. Yes, that was kind of on the northern part of the city. A pool which in Hebrew was called Bethsaida or Bethesda, a word that means house of mercy. The word bait, like Bethel, house of God, Samuel, gift of God, but bait usually is house. And so, house of mercy. Those sick, blind, lame, paralyzed were brought and placed in the water. Most understand that people then thought that the water had medicinal qualities, kind of like Warm Springs, Georgia, or something like that. That, you know, by the way, there is a lot of seismic activity in that part of the world. There is a rift, you know, the Jordan Rift that goes down that area, and there's you know, small earthquakes. And what is at one point a little pond or a pool, after some earthquakes, you know, it all leaks out through various fissures in the rock. And so that's kind of the explanation. You can visit it now. I'll try to show some pictures of this on the Lord's Day. However, you know, you can see steps that are going down, but there's no water there. It's all out. So most understand that people then thought the water had medicinal qualities. Jesus picked out a man to heal. He had been lame for how many years? 38. Jesus asked him if he would like to get well. He responded by saying that he didn't have anyone to do what? To put him in, yes. A lot of people Jesus could have healed, but he heals this one. Jesus told him, rise, take up your bed and walk. Immediately he was well, did as Jesus said. John mentions that it was the Sabbath day, likely anticipating the conflict that follows. Okay, so the Waldrons make this really good point in the book, and that is that there are all kinds, John mentions there are all kinds of sick people. Does he heal all of them? No, he heals one. He heals one. And so one of the purposes of Jesus was not make everybody well. It was simply to show, and one would suffice, one would show that he was deity. Okay, we're going to have to stop. It's 5 till. That's right. He couldn't get up and do. That's exactly right. Yeah, good point. Let's stop, and we'll have to pick up with the rest of the speech. And I'll try not to go into kind of detail I did. Well, I wanted to get that out on the fasting and talk about some of these overall ideas. All right, thank you.